İkinci sunumumuz Medicinal Leech Aquaculture in Turkey. Dr. Mustafa CEYLAN, Isparta University of Applied Science, Turkey. Mustafa Hocam buyurun.
Hocam teşekkür ederim. Değerli katılımcılar, hepinizi saygı ve sevgiyle tekrar selamlıyorum. Türkiye'deki tıbbi sülük yetiştiriciliği konusunu anlatmak için.
Good morning. I will be talking about medicinal leech aquaculture in Turkey. This is the outline of my presentation. First, I'm going to make an introduction, and then I'll be talking about the medicinal leech farms in Turkey. There are some universities and institutions which are dealing with the medicinal leech breeding in Turkey. Then I'll talking about the breeding processes, the problems, challenges, and some recommendations, and then I will conclude my presentation. This is a summary of my presentation indeed, and this clearly shows the current situation. So in the past, the leeches used to be sold in the bazaars and markets, but now you can buy them online through internet, and we can focus on the framework with this picture. And in total, 32 leech species were identified in Turkey, and 2 are medicinal. And here we need to handle this situation, in fact, very seriously. In 2014, our country announced the Complementary and Traditional Medicine Practices Regulation. It has been a milestone. In fact, currently we have 8 licensed and 4 design-approved companies, farms in Turkey. And why is the number of companies increasing? Because the regulation just wants the leeches to be obtained from the facilities that produce sterile leeches. And why do we need to breed the leeches? Because there is a significant increase in the leech demand, and the populations are decreasing and diminishing significantly. So it is not possible to cover the demand with the natural population. That is why we need the aquaculture facilities and farms. And the leeches that are collected from the nature may create the infection risk, and that is why aquaculture is an inevitable activity for us. Let's talk about the aquaculture. As I said, there are 8 licensed farms so far, and the project capacity is 8,372 kilograms, and the production capacity is 6,500 kilograms. Eğirdir, Bolu, Kayseri, Sakarya, Manisa, Konya, Samsun are the provinces where these farms are established and located. In Kayseri, there are 2 farms, whereas there is 1 company or 1 farm each in the other provinces, and all their individual capacities are shown in the slide. The DG for Fisheries and Aquaculture, in fact, makes the authorization and gives the mandate based on Hirudo verbana. In fact, Hirudo suluki is also available in our country, but it is an endemic species and it's not subject to the legislation. And maybe we can discuss this. Is it necessary to develop a policy in order to capitalize on it and make trade of the suluki? We may discuss this. We have just concluded a TÜBİTAK project, and in that scope, we compared Hirudo suluki and Hirudo verbana. In green color, you see an advantageous condition, and in red color, you see a disadvantaged condition. Survival rate during growth. Hirudo verbana is quite ambitious, 99%, almost no death. However, the Hirudo suluki has a survival chance of 87%. And what is the survival rate during reproduction? And Hirudo suluki seems to be more stable, but in this respect, Hirudo verbana is lagging behind the suluki with 78%. And it means that reproduction can be very shocking for the verbana species. Gravidity rate. It's surprising. Almost all individuals of the Hirudo suluki, in fact, start the gravidity activity and start laying the cocoons it is very high, 98%, but in Hirudo verbana, it's just 60% to give gravity at an early year of life. In fact, almost let's say all of the Hirudo verbana individuals deposit cocoons, but it's 93% in Hirudo suluki. Cocoon efficiency, it's higher in the suluki with 4.53. And since it is smaller in size, in Hirudo suluki, the cocoon size is also smaller. So verbana is smaller, I'm sorry, it's greater in its own body size and also in the size of its cocoons. And the offsprings, then when you look at the number of offsprings, their number is smaller in Hirudo suluki, but their size is bigger again in suluki. With that project, in fact, I had the chance of getting to know many farms and companies, and that has been quite advantageous. They also sent some pictures, and some of them are visible on the screen. I would like to show you the capabilities of certain farms. And generally speaking, you see some outdoor ponds, and there is the production process going on there. And in the indoor system, there is a closed system, shelf system for the reproduction and production. And this is also medicinal leech farm. First, some outdoor pictures, and then here you see some indoor structures. You see ponds encircled with ceramic structures. Now, Farmedi farm. This farm is located in Bolu, and the ponds are made of concrete. And in those, you see the feeding spaces. I'm sorry, I'm getting an alarm related to my battery. I'm just going to plug it in. Sorry for that. And this is MS Medicinal Leech Farm located in Eğirdir. You see some natural pools outside, and on the inside you see glass jars for the production and the cocoons. And in Sakarya, Namık Öze farm is located. In red, you see the water level flood, the water, and also in the red rectangle, you see the moist soil for this depositing of the cocoons. And this is the interior, the shelf system, and certain rearing and production processes are going.
Yansıda görmüş olduğunuz gibi dışarıda, dış mekanda doğal bir havuz.
There are two companies in Kayseri, Nimet Ekran. And you see some ditches in the middle. These are natural structures that are created in order for the leeches to deposit their cocoons. And again, on the interior, you can see some cocoons and they're hatching. In Konya, there is another farm, Süleyman Şenol. And this system is integrated with a greenhouse. And on the right-hand side, you see the heating assembly. It gives a great advantage during the winter months, because in Konya, winter is quite harsh, and they can also benefit from the greenhouse system for better ambient conditions. And on the inside, there is the shelf system that is used for the production. And on the right-hand side, you see some cloths that is used as feed for the juveniles. Now, let me talk about the public side, the universities and the institutions. So if there is any further contribution, please give me a signal, because I just scanned some theses and also some other studies. Ankara Yıldırım Beyazıt University, Fırat University, Eğirdir University, Isparta University of Applied Sciences, İzmir Katip Çelebi University, Kahramanmaraş Sütçü İmam University, Karabük University, Kocaeli University, and Sinop University. All these universities, in fact, hosted certain studies and leaches regarding the medicinal leech and its aquaculture. in fact, that regulation was published in the official gazette at the beginning of this week, and it was a nice surprise for us. And Isparta University of Applied Sciences Medicinal Leech Application and Research Center isn't operational now. We are willing to collaborate with anyone who is interested, in particular the international partners. We'll be glad to collaborate with you. In 2015, Eğirdir Fisheries Research Institute of the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, in effect, established its medicinal leech laboratory. I was involved in the establishment of this laboratory, and we started with F0 generation and reached up to F4. Later on, you will hear the details from the deputy DG. And in fact, many individuals who wanted to engage in the aquaculture of medicinal leeches, in fact, benefited from the services of this laboratory. What are the common breeding processes and methods of the farms? Let me talk about them now. So let's talk about the selection of the brooding stock. First, discoloration in the solitarium region, the reproductive region, shows that the individual is ready for reproduction. So if there is discoloring and fading, then it is ready for depositing cocoons. And it's also important to say that the longer the individual stays in the farm, the reproduction capability will be decreased for the brooding stock. So it is also making the process economical. And the moisture content is the most commonly used material for depositing of cocoons, and the moisture ratio is about 75%. In Europe and in Asia, sphagnum is used, and it is not actively used here. And we're glad about it because using the moist peat does not give us any disadvantage in the production. Acidity is quite low, pH level is quite low in Europe, so using the peat, it can be a disadvantage there. But in Turkey, the levels are more neutral. That is why we can easily make good use of the peat. Now, very briefly, some reproduction parameters. These are the averages for Turkey. The age of the brood stock, at average, they can be for 2 years, and it starts with the 6 months of age, and up to 5 years of age, they can be available for the production activities. So if you target at the proper range, that will be very useful. And reproductive bouts 3, but it's not very reasonable to go over 2, because the total figures will be diminished. Cocoons per leech 3.2, and during the reproduction period, there is about 60% body weight lost in the leeches. If you start with 10 grams, you end up with 6 grams. And in 2.5 months, in fact, there is a huge loss of weight. And it is a great wear for the brood stock, and that is why then you will be forced to take them away from the stock, because they are already worn out, and you won't insist on keeping them in the brood stock. And for feeding, normally fresh cord blood is used for feed. Normally in making the sucuk, the Turkish sausage, you use the intestines and you dry them. You dry the cow intestine, and then you can use it for feeding. Before feeding and after feeding, we also compare the weight, and sometimes 10 or up to 12 folds of increase can be seen in the body weight. And it means that after the feeding, the process can be very troublesome for the leeches. Sales of the leech in Turkey, the sizes quite differ: baby size, buttock size, doctor size, standard size, jumbo size, and very recently we have the broad stock size. on the market. And also, there's a gift of the complementary and traditional medicine regulation. After this, especially in sensitive body sites, just like the lips and the cheeks, in order to implement the Leech solution, they just crack the cocoon open on the bad side. So they just use the fresh juveniles. That is why there is also the cocoon size available on the market. Now let me talk about the overall challenges and problems. After the feeding, the first 50 days will be very sensitive because the consumed blood will be vomited and taken out of the body, and that can be a reason for death, and also that may lead to the decreased quality of the environment. Cannibalistic behavior is quite stunning after feeding the leeches. In fact, if you do not make a good and successful distinction between the leeches who are hungry and who are not, then there will be a huge aggression and attack from one party onto the another. So from the dorsal and ventral part of the leech, we captured certain cannibalism signs, and when you see these triangular star, you see that it was attacked by a cannibal. In fact, this can be the topic of a symposium by itself. This is morphological deformation in the leeches. We contacted many farms and they are suffering a lot from this problem. So up to a certain feeding level, the leeches proceed quite well and properly, but sometimes the ambient and environmental conditions may remain poor. Sometimes the feeding source may not be the optimal. Sometimes the hygiene conditions may not be fulfilled to the best extent, and all these create some morphological deformations, and that quite affects the rentability. Morphological deformation in the cocoons, this is also seen in a widespread manner, and also that leads to the reduction of the offspring efficiency. And the spongeous structure around the cocoon is a great advantage because it is a protection against the shocks and impacts, and it keeps the moisture. Now, conclusion part. Day by day, medicinal leech farms are increasing in Turkey, according to our observations. And if in future we're going to write the history of medicinal leech sector in Turkey, I think we will talking about before and after 2014, because in the official gazette in that year, the relevant regulation was published. And according to the feedback that we got from the market, the sales price is quite a major reason to turn to the medicinal leech breeding sector. And currently, in fact, you cannot buy it even for 8 Turkish lira because there's a huge insufficiency in the supply, especially seasonal. It is not possible to supply and cover the demand. In the farms, you see a great and general success to obtain cocoons and offsprings, but the essential problem relates to the period after the first feeding. So as soon as the leech tastes the blood, then the problems start to emerge. These problems create uncertainty, adds to the costs, and also the reproduction period normally starts with very high ambitions, for many entrepreneurs. But at the end of the growing period, sometimes they end up with 0 products. This should always be kept in mind. Yes, these prices are very high, but there are reasons for the high prices. Okay, the unit price for the leech is 8 Turkish lira, and you can easily think that this is a profitable sector, but that can be a wrong way of thinking. You have to know a lot about the leeches. Of course, we need scientific studies. And last but not least, let me say that in postgraduate education, we have to focus on the field of medicinal leeches because it's a strategic product. It's a valuable product for our country. And also at the global scale, it is valuable. So we need more postgraduate thesis studies, and after writing their thesis, in fact, the students can go into the public sector and start working. I know 3 students who have completed their postgraduate education, but they couldn't find any position in the public sector, but we are wasting those human resources, I guess. This is my last slide. As I said yesterday, so in order to support the nature, the leech breeders should be encouraged to release some part of the leeches they produce into the nature. It's important to restore the nature by this method. And we have to encourage the breeders in order to do them. We have to create a reason for them so that they will release into the wild. And endemism of the Turkish medicinal leech should be protected. In fact, that endemic species is Suluki, found in the southeastern part of Turkey, and it's a very ambitious species. I already gave the comparison against Hirudo verbana. It is quite advantageous in certain aspects, so we should find a solution that is not going to ignore the advantages of the Suluki species. Also, the effects on the native species are not well known, are not well studied. So the import of alien species, just like Hirudo medicinalis, Hirudo orientalis, they should not be allowed because in terms of production, this may have a certain impact and we should be sensitive about this. I would like to thank you for your patience and attention. Mr. Mustafa CEYLAN, thank you very much for your presentation. It was quite influential and comprehensive. I would like to get the questions, if any. And then I saw the message from Dr. Malik, and the next presenter will be Dr. Malik. But before Dr. Malik takes the floor, I would like to collect the questions for Mr. CEYLAN. Hello, Professor, can you hear me properly? Yes, we can. Go ahead. Hello. With my best regards.
olmadı. Biraz da yoğunluk vardı. Mustafa hocamla da görüştük.
Yesterday was a very busy day.
Aslında Naim hocamın sunumu hakkında ben de birkaç soru sormak istiyordum. Hatta
I wanted to ask some questions regarding the presentation that was delivered by Mr. Naim CEYLAN yesterday, but there was not much time to do it because it was already a very intensive schedule. But now, availing myself of this opportunity, I would like to thank you, Mr. CEYLAN. Yes, thank you. But if you have any question, please give it now. For Mr. CEYLAN. Yes, Mr. CEYLAN, thank you very much for your presentation. You touched upon very important topics. So I have an important question for you because
sıkıntılar yaşanıyor tabii ki. Yani şu anda üreticiler
that's quite an interesting topic for me. Normally the breeders are dealing with many problems in the production of the leeches. There is one most common problem, however, the fresh leeches that are just hatched from the cocoon. As soon as they are given the first feed, as soon as they taste the blood, the breeders start to encounter losses in production. So starting with the first feeding, the leeches start to die and their productivity drops.
Farklı söylentiler, farklı söylemler duyuyoruz. İşte
hear a lot of different myths about this. For example, they say that it's necessary to add certain solutions into the blood. And some people say that it is necessary to use anticoagulants, or sometimes they say some herbal mixtures need to be used, etc. Very different remarks, very different suggestions. So, what do you think? Which one is the most optimal method in order to minimize the loss of fresh leeches? How should we feed them? Thank you, Professor, for this precious question. I will try to give a brief answer. I have some experience in dealing with these kinds of problems. I can easily say that, first of all, the farm has to check its hygiene conditions. it has to handle the hygiene carefully. Sometimes the perception is faulty. They say that, okay, these leeches are already living in the swamp and they can survive in any conditions. No, a swamp is not a filter place. In fact, there are many organisms living in a swamp. So you have to make sure of hygiene in your farm. The second issue is related to the blood source. And the blood source should come from the slaughterhouses, which are checked and inspected by the veterinary surgeons. And you cannot slaughter any animal that you find, but they have to be checked and inspected before they are slaughtered. And also, the history of the blood, I mean, the history of the slaughtered animal is important. You have to check if any antibiotics or vitamins were used in that animal before it was slaughtered. You talked about anticoagulants, and its cost per 1 liter of blood is about 30 Turkish lira, because they use heparin, 6 milligrams per liter. It adds to the cost, and also it's a chemical. So after a certain level, it causes deformation and death of the leech. So at least there is this possibility, and I have this concern because we made some studies with smaller doses, you can get better results. So you have to think in an integrated way. And if you focus on all these aspects, I believe this problem
Hocam,
will
çok
be
teşekkürler.
sorted out.
Bu arada ben
Thank
şeyi
you,
de belirtebilir
Professor.
miyim? Mustafa
Also
Hocam'ın
let me
lisansüstü
add
çalışmalarıyla
one more
ilgili
thing regarding the
düşüncelerine
postgraduate
katılıyorum.
studies. You
Biz
gave certain
zaten
remarks,
Mustafa
Mr.
Hocam,
Ceylan,
Naim
and I
Hocam'la
agree
sürekli
with you.
irtibat halindeyiz bu
In fact,
konuda.
I keep in continuous
Bizim
contact
Ankara
with
Yıldırım
Mustafa
Beyazıt
Ceylan
Üniversitesi'nde
and Naim Salam.
biyoterapötik
In
ürünler
Ankara
araştırma
Yıldırım
geliştirme
Beyazıt
programı,
University, we
lisansüstü
have
eğitim programı
biotherapeutic
oluşturduk. Bu da
products,
YÖK bursu alan, YÖK
aquaculture
desteği alan bir program. Yüksek lisans ve doktora öğrencilerimiz
program
var, şu
that is
anda
supported by the
başladılar.
Higher Education Council of
Ve
Turkey. We
bunların
have
yapacağı
postgraduate
çalışmalar
students who
konusunda
are
da
currently
zaten
studying in that program now.
Naim
In
Hocam'la
fact,
yıllarını bu işe vermiş bu
Professor
sektörün
Naim Salam
duayenlerinden Naim
dedicated
Hocam'la, Mustafa
long
Bey'le,
years of his
Mustafa
life to
Ceylan
this sector,
Hocam'la
and also
istişare
this
halindeyiz.
Professor
Yani bu
Mustafa
öğrencileri
Ceylan. We are
çalıştırarak
always consulting
ülkemize
with
ne
these
gibi
two
bir katkısı
professors in
olur,
order
katma
to
değeri olur
find
şeklinde.
the fields of
Yani
study for these
burada
students, and we
lisansüstü
are
eğitim
trying to decide what will be the
hocalarımın
most
da
valuable
desteğiyle
study
iyi
topic for the
bir
country.
şart
With the
sağlayacağız.
support to
Ama
come from these professors, we are
sonrasındaki
going to
istihdam
provide a
problemi
good
de
environment to
Mustafa Bey'in
study for
dediği
these
gibi
students. But later
gerçekten
on, there will be the
önemli.
employment
Yani
problem.
lisansüstü,
And you
yüksek
already
lisansı, doktora
underlined this,
bitiren
Mr. Ceylan.
öğrencilerimizin
Any students who
herhangi bir
complete
üniversitede veya
their
Ar-Ge kuruluşunda
graduate study and also the doctorate
istihdam
study,
edilememesi
if they
tabii bu
cannot be
alanın
employed in an
kısırlaşması
R&D
anlamına geliyor.
institute,
Bunu da
it means that
değerli
there will
büyüklerimizin,
not
kurum
be any
yetkililerinin
efficiency
değerlendirip
in this field.
istihdam
So
sorununu
distinguished
çözmesini rica
authorities
ediyoruz.
of the institutions, please
Teşekkür
take this
ederim
into
hocam.
consideration and handle this problem of unemployment. Thank you. In the chat box, I see a question for Mustafa Ceylan. I don't want to skip this. And however, I see that a colleague is raising hand, Ms. Seval Bahadır. Let's get your question first, and then I will read the question in the chat box. But please, you go first, Ms. Seval Bahadır. Can you hear Ms. Seval Bahadır? Yes, I can, but I just didn't unmute myself. I'd like to thank you for the presentation, Mr. Mustafa Ceylan. That was a brilliant presentation. You showed pictures of certain leech farms. I believe that the environment is not quite sterile there. For example, the ponds where the cocoons are deposited, and also the reproduction facilities, I think they are not very sterile. So what can be done for inspection of the farms? Do you have any recommendations about this? And also, during the production processes, have you detected any diseases or ailments? And also another question. When you are feeding the animal, do you do any sterilization regarding the blood? Well, the farms are inspected by the DG for Fisheries and Aquaculture. And maybe we have one authority from the DG. I also wonder the details. Maybe, okay, but I just want to hear your recommendations from your side to the ministry. Well, of course, if you have any proposals or recommendations, Professor, we can hear it. I can also contribute to this discussion. But let's hear Mustafa CEYLAN first. Then I will talk about sterilization and sterility. Regarding hygiene, yes, I have some concern. Frankly speaking, I have some concerns regarding hygiene. That is why training and education is important with this view too. How should you obtain the leeches? How should you grow them? And all these factors should be covered during the training and education. You start with the problems, and then you do prioritization. And if this is not done, you see further problems in a farm, and then you see a chain of problems. That's why this has to be our concern. Maybe the DG for Fisheries and Aquaculture, when you are doing inspections, maybe you can underline these issues. I'm sorry to interrupt. The soil for depositing of cocoons. Sterilization is also important. I see that the soil is randomly thrown into the ponds, but isn't some sterilization cycle necessary before they are put there? What is your idea? Well, there is some natural bacteria flora presence there, and there will be some microbial contamination one way or other. So even if you sterilize the soil and put it in the environment, after some time, in fact, you will not keep at zero microbial level. So individuals probably you saw something. I'm not sure about which visual you are talking. I don't say that all of them are in a poor condition, but thinking about the cocoon deposit environments, you cannot automatically say that they are not hygienic, because they're also trying to create some natural environment there. Look at the nature and wild. The leeches just leave the aquatic environment and they leave the cocoons on the terrestrial environment. So if there is any specific visual that you are referring to, please let me know. Let me take over, Mustafa CEYLAN. Well, dear Seval, there is no sterile leech, but you can try creating sterile conditions, and it's not possible to sterile the soil. We cannot do it. It is impossible. And in order for this organism to live and survive, it needs other organisms, and endosymbionts are needed, and they come from the soil and water, and just like the molasses, and you cannot avoid it. Look at the human organism. So there is no full sterilization, and each human body has some bacterial flora, and this is also true and applicable for the leech. But what we mean by sterilization is something else. There may be certain zoonotic diseases that may be contracted by the human. So other diseases should not be transmitted human to human. There is only one way of growing these leeches, and it is in the soil, because we imitate the natural environment. Maybe I answered your question. Yes, you did. Satisfactory. And there was another concern of Ms. Seval Bahadır regarding feeding. I would like to give some clarifications. In the farms, in fact, in the authorized laboratories of the ministry, the necessary analyses are made on the blood to make sure that there are no diseases that can be transmitted via the blood. And this is also how we make the inspections. So the blood does not directly go from the slaughterhouse to the farm. There is a laboratory doing the analysis in between. Does that reassure you, Bahadır, Mrs. Bahadır? Yes, thank you. It took long, but there are some more questions. In fact, I would like to cover them because this is an important topic. The first one is related to the blood coming from the slaughterhouse. Is it directly used without disinfection and sterilization? In fact, Nuran told about this, but maybe Mustafa CEYLAN, you can also give a certain remark.
Actually, maybe there needs to be something that should be learned from Ms. Nuran, and obviously there is this sensitivity, and obviously the companies should be careful about it. So there is this pasteurization procedure. Sterilization is possible in this sense, and pasteurization is implemented in the blood, and it can be offered as a solution. Yes, this is a very effective solution. So if you keep it under ultraviolet for 1 hour, then it can be kept and used later on. From Iran, we have this question after the feeding. I am just translating into Turkish now. So our participant asks whether we have a new method to prevent the change in the morphology of the leech after feeding. So this is a current problem that we are suffering from. This is not peculiar to our country. It's a common problem worldwide, actually, the change in the morphology of the leech after feeding. So this is my principle in working. I keep my lab conditions very sterile. After the feeding, I clean the environment using bleach. I keep the ventilation on, and these are my main principles to keep the environment hygienic. So
hayvanları getiren besicilerden temin etme.
I am trying to supply it from the right kind of vendors. This is also one of my principles. If you are careful about those principles and if you apply those in your work, then you can actually not eliminate this distinction between the feeding and non-feeding leech, but you can at least minimize it. So we have a bit of a delay regarding our time frame, but you have already asked your question. Okay, Mr.